Sadaf, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Thank you for having me.
You know, Sadaf, finding the right words to tell to someone who is grieving can be really difficult. And we don't want to cause people suffering who are already suffering, but it sometimes seems impossible not to do that, right? And then we end up like disappointing people, making them angry, making them upset. How do we avoid that?
That's actually a very heavy question. What is the exact right way to talk to a person who's grieving?
Yes. And everyone's different, right? Some people will appreciate certain things said to them and other people might not, right?
Right. So what I do in my work, I meet people where they're at. So every person is different. Their personalities are different. Their preferences are different. Also, their past life experiences are different. So people respond to grief differently. There's no one way of grieving. So if you know the person, that's actually, it works for your advantage. But sometimes grief, when people are grieving, you find out different sides of them that you had known before. And that's why you have to meet them where they're at. If they are in the mood to talk, then you talk. If they're not, then don't just poke around and ask too many questions. The best thing that you can do to a person who's grieving is just listen. And you don't have to talk all the time. You can hold silence. And that's a very hard thing. It doesn't come naturally to people. Like, how can I just, what do you mean? Like stare at them? Not really. Majority of the conversation, communication, 95% is nonverbal. So you can communicate with them non-verbally. Do something that would help them. You can support a grieving person by making food for them, or ask them if they would like their home to be cleaned, or just hug them, or just be there for them. And then the best thing you can do is, yes, listen, but there are ways to listen. And I would like to explore that with you further.
Please talk about how you can listen, because it's very tough when you're in that situation to just stay silent. We're not used to long silences, right?
Right.
And especially in a situation like grief, which we're already uncomfortable with, right? We try to fill the silence with something, but it ends up being things that are inappropriate for the circumstance.
Right. And it just comes out as like really awkward, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have asked that question, or sometimes you're just not sure. First of all, best thing is to not say much or talk much, but there is a thing called, when I was getting my psychotherapy training, we were taught how to be great listeners. And before we were taught how to be great listeners, we were taught how to be bad listeners or signs of a bad listener. So if you can relate to it, then just don't do it. And then you automatically become a good listener. So one of the ways you can be a bad listener is if you are one-upper. So if the speaker is saying something or sharing something, you just say, oh, that, but let me tell you what I went through. So you're one-upping them and you're dismissing their experiences. You're not acknowledging where they're at.
Some people do that, like not talking about their own experience, but they'll say, you know, somebody had this situation and it was really bad, so at least you didn't have that, you know?
Yeah.
So they're trying to minimize the pain. They're not talking about themselves, but they're talking about someone else.
Yes.
But I think the person in that situation who's grieving doesn't want to hear about other people, right?
Yeah,
they're not concerned.
It's their moment because it's their grief. So yes, there's poverty, hunger, so many things in the world, but that's not the appropriate time to bring it up. So any time you feel that you have to begin your sentence with at least, that's
at least you have other children, you know,
Yes.
at least you can get married again, sort of thing.
Yeah, so you should just stop there. Don't finish that sentence. These are very ghosting sentences that people who are grieving can finish it off with something that's not healthy for them. So yeah, so instead of one-upping them or using at least words, these are the signs of a bad listener. Another way is a boomerang question. So everybody knows what boomerang is. So basically people ask question when they go and for condolences, they're asking questions, but just with the intention of answering it for themselves. An example of it is like, oh, how was your weekend? Because mine was, and then they start talking about their weekend. So it's a boomerang question. So avoid that. That's a sign of a bad listener. Another sign of a bad listener is the mechanic. They're looking for, just like how a mechanic looks for faults in the car and then says, here's what you need to do. So yeah, you don't do that either. Don't be the mechanic.
Can you give an example of how someone would be like a mechanic or let's say a fixer?
Yes, so like different ways. It depends on your culture. In my culture, sometimes, let's say, if a person is going through, let's say, cancer, people come out with all sorts of herbal remedies. And in my culture, it's called totke. And they give all these remedies. And even though they know that this person is in stage 4 and nothing's going to help.
And the person probably didn't even ask for these remedies.
Yes.
Doesn't even want them.
Right. So a grieving person sometimes just needs you to be there and not say anything. Sometimes you have to sit with people in darkness and you don't always have to rescue them. And probably if you're not a trained individual, don't rescue them. Just be there for them. Sometimes it's also our own discomfort sitting with the darkness that makes it awkward for us to visit a grieving person. So don't be the mechanic. Don't ask boomerang questions, and don't one-up them. Another way is that some people have done their research. They found out that to be a good listener, you have to ask a lot of questions. So then it's called the interrogator. So sometimes people don't know how to ask questions. So what they do is they literally marinate the person with questions. So just the person gets surrounded by all these questions and the person gets overwhelmed by them. So you don't have to ask question after question because it feels like really interrogation. And I'm just going to share one more piece and then I'll give you a resource and you can do your research on your own, how to be a bad listener. And just don't do that. The last one is the inspector. So basically you are asking a question, a closed-ended question, but in a way that's like a detective might ask a suspect to lure him into confession. Like, didn't you say last week and then you make your statement. Wasn't that true that something like that? So try not to ask questions like that. If you don't know or don't know what to say or do, just hold their hands if you can, or just walk alongside of them in their journey.
Things like saying like, I'm sorry, or like, I love you. Those sorts of things are you can say it at any time and they would come out perfectly, you know?
Right. And there are certain things actually that you can say, like, I feel so sorry for your loss. It's a very acceptable form of something to say to a grieving person. Also, here is my number and I would be waiting for your call and I'm here to listen. Instead of saying, call me whenever you want, or I'll be there to take your call. Something like that, very shallow, or something like, I understand exactly how you feel. These are very, very shallow statements. They don't mean anything to a grieving person. Or for some people, they might do the trick, but try to avoid saying these or giving these comments. Instead,
what about saying something like, I wish I could take away your pain?
Yeah, that's something you know that you can't do that. It's their pain and they have to embrace it and accept their new reality. But you can say that I'm here as you go through this pain. And instead of saying that they are at a better place, that's actually a very dangerous statement too.
To say that the person who is lost is in a better place.
Yeah. the person you lost is at a better place, or it was part of God's plan. Because what that does, what had happened with my clients, it can create suicidal ideation. That I want to be with my loved one and I want to be in that better place. So, or sometimes it creates anger in the grieving person that I want that my loved one to be beside me. That's the better place. So
it's not necessarily that those things are inaccurate. It's just the wrong timing, right?
Yeah,
to be able to say that.
Inappropriate.
Yes.
Yeah. So instead of saying many things, try to limit what you say and try to increase what you do. So give them some respite, making meals for them, or just being there is the most people want.
Just one more thing, sometimes people say, like, you have to be strong. You have to be strong for your brother or your child or your wife or something like this. Do you think that's a good thing to say?
That's actually, I would not say that. As a grief therapist, I would never say that to my clients because that actually dismisses their experience and it doesn't make room for their feelings. It denies the reality of grief for them that, yes, you're going through this pain, but don't deal with it, move on. So there's no such thing as moving on from grief, but we move forward. We move, we don't resolve and close. So there's no resolution and closure with grief, but then there should be reconciliation and integration into life. So you learn to live with grief and not just avoid and dodge it.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Sadaf.
You're welcome.
If you enjoyed this video, click like and subscribe. And please donate to support our work at QuranSpeaks.com.